In today's video, we will list 25 interesting and not widely known facts from World War II. Hopefully, you will all find some that are new and interesting to you. Many of these facts I have mentioned separately in my earlier videos, so if you want to know more about one of these topics, you can find a detailed video covering it on the channel. So without further ado, let's begin. By 1944, in preparation for the Normandy landings, more than 1.5 million American military personnel were stationed in the United Kingdom. And from that, more than 425,000 was transported there by just two ships, the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth ocean liners, which traveled between England and the US many times and were the largest and fastest troop transports of World War II, carrying up to 15,000 men in a single voyage. The development of maybe the most famous American World War II fighter plane, the P-51 Mustang, was actually sparked by a British request. In 1938, a British purchasing commission was sent to America to buy P-40 fighters, but Curtiss didn't have the capacity for new orders. And during a meeting between the head of the purchasing commission, Sir Harry Self, and the head of North American Aviation, James Kindelberger, Sir Harry asked if they could manufacture the P-40 fighters under license. But Kindelberger stated they can design a better plane in shorter time than what it would take to set up the production for the P-40 fighters. This design, the North American NA-73X, was the plane that became the P-51 Mustang. Most people know the Messerschmitt Bf109 as one of the most famous German fighters. But when the first prototype of the plane took to the air in May 1935, the planned German engines for the new design were not yet ready. This resulted in the strange situation that the aircraft, which was the main opponent for the Spitfire in World War II, made its maiden flight using a British Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine. The build-up for D-Day is widely known as maybe the largest operation in World War II. And during the preparation for the invasion, the total man-hours spent on building all the depots, hospitals, housing, airfields, and other installations to accommodate all the men and materials altogether took more than 400 million man-hours. It is widely known the Czech-designed Panzer 38T was a successful early war light tank used by the German forces. But not many people know that the same type was actually tested by the British as well in early 1939, who considered purchasing the type. In February 1939, one of these tanks were shipped to England for trials. But the British found the tank's mobility not up to their standards, and its interior too cramped. So in the end, they opted for their own designs. The designer of the amphibious Sherman DD model, Nicholas Straussler, was a Hungarian-born engineer, and he also designed the Alvis Straussler bomb trolley, which was widely used by the RAF in World War II. His amphibious design, the floating screen, was first tested on British Tetrarch models in 1941, before it was modified for the Sherman tanks and used during the Normandy landings. Before the M26 Pershing entered service, there were plans to use its turret and 90mm gun on a Sherman chassis. Both of the tanks used the same 69-inch turret ring, so it was considered to actually use this gun and turret and modify the readily available Sherman chassis. But the earliest estimated delivery dates for these models were January 1945, and by that time the M26 was already in production. The M3 Stuart light tank became obsolete quite early in the war, and it was originally planned to be replaced by more advanced types, developed under the T7 project, which started in 1941. But after 2 years of experimental designs, this project was cancelled. This was the reason the M3s were only replaced with the M24 Chaffee models in 1944. and some units used the Stuart until the end of the war. In April 1943, a strange agreement took place between the Allies and the Germans, when the two sides agreed on a partial ceasefire, which allowed Allied bombers to fly over the Netherlands safely and deliver food drops to the starving Dutch population. Later, to supplement the food drops, Operation Faust was initiated. And on 2nd of May, 200 Allied food trucks were allowed to cross the front lines and drive to Rhenen, where they were taken over by Dutch truck drivers. During World War II, the RAF and the US Army Air Force together used more than 600 airfields scattered around the United Kingdom. The RAF used around 450 airfields, while the remaining more than 200 locations were used by over 500,000 US Army Air Force personnel, around 2,500 men at each airfield. Though the M3 light tank became obsolete quickly during World War II, its chassis was used to test many experimental variants, like the T-27 and 29 mortar motor carriages, the T-56 and T-57 gun motor carriages equipped with a 76mm gun, the M3 with a Maxon quad anti-aircraft turret, or the 155mm howitzer motor carriage T-64. During World War II, the Allied forces used more than 20 million Jerrycans in Europe. More than 7 million of them were made just in 1944, in preparation for the Normandy invasion. Though the Allied crews were instructed to keep and reuse the cans, so many were lost in France, sometimes the shortage caused problems in the fuel supply. After the end of the war, the US forces started a campaign, offering prizes to school children for returning Jerrycans, and more than 1 million cans were actually returned thanks to this program. During Operation Pluto, which was a pipeline laid down between England and France to supply fuel for the Normandy invasion, 2 different types of underwater pipes were developed. The total cost of the operation was £4.5 million, and to supply the hundreds of kilometers of pipes in time, every big cable-making machine in the United Kingdom was used for this task. The German equivalent of the American Jeep, the so-called Kugelwagen, was based on the original Volkswagen Type 1 Beetle. It used the same 1130cc air-cooled engine and the same basic drivetrain, though the military version used lower gears and locking wheel hubs for better off-road capabilities. The first version of the Kugelwagen was actually just a lightened and modified Beetle with a stronger chassis, but later it received its signature angular body. Most people know the B-17 Flying Fortress as a very sturdy plane, which could take a great amount of damage and still fly home. But in February 1943, one of these planes demonstrated a truly outstanding performance. The B-17 All-American was returning from a mission when German fighters attacked their formation. One of the German Bf109s lost control after it was hit, and its wing almost completely cut through the fuselage of the B-17 just before the tail, severing the control cables. But by some miracle, the All-American kept flying, and the crew, using the bomb sight and the autopilot, managed to stay in control of the aircraft and land it safely at their home base. To help unload the supplies after the Normandy landings, the so-called Mulberry harbors were designed, built from floating piers. To protect these artificial harbors in the stormy weather, the Allies built giant concrete breakwaters, the so-called Phoenixes, which were then floated over the channel and sunk at their designated places. Each of them was 200 feet long, and they weighted 6,000 to 8,000 tons. More than 150 of these were required, and initially 25,000 people were working on this project, and later they were supplemented by another 40,000 men. The German army in World War II used many different types of motorcycles, but maybe the two most prominent ones were the BMW R75 and the tuned-up KS750. Together from the two types, around 35,000 units were produced, and they used many interesting features. For better off-road capabilities, the sidecar's wheel was driven as well. They had reverse gears, featured hand and foot warmers, and many sidecars were heated too. They were so successful that the American forces reverse-engineered the BMW motorcycle, creating the Harley-Davidson XA model. Everyone knows the World War II Jeep as the main transport for American troops, but many people don't know how many of these vehicles were actually produced. The original design was developed by American Bantam to an army request in 1940, when the army only gave the manufacturers 11 days to submit their designs. Though Bantam won the competition, but being a small company, they only participated in the production of the first batch of these vehicles, and later the bigger manufacturing contracts were issued to Willys and Ford. And by the end of the war, the production of the type reached 363,000 units from Willys and 280,000 units from Ford. We already mentioned Operation Pluto earlier, but we have some more interesting facts about the operation. To lay down the cables through the channel, huge floating drums were used, each of them 60 feet long and 40 feet in diameter. These drums themselves weighted around 250 tons, and when they were fully loaded with pipes, their displacement increased to some 1,600 tons. The pipeline, though it was only a smaller part of the fuel supply chain, delivered 4,500 tons of fuel every day by the end of the war. And by the time it was shut down in August 1945, the total amount of fuel delivered was some 820 million liters. The Messerschmitt Me-262 is the most famous German jet fighter, but actually there was another jet-powered fighter aircraft that flew almost a year before the Messerschmitt design. The development of the Heinkel HE-280 started in 1939, using the company's experience gathered with the earlier HE-178 model, which was the first turbojet-powered aircraft of the world. The fighter used Henschel's in-house developed HES-8 engines designed by Hans von Ohain. But the development of these engines was too troublesome. Eventually, the delays on the engine development and the politics in the Air Ministry resulted in the termination of the HE-280 project in 1943 in favor of the Messerschmitt Me-262. The late war German weapons, like the HS-293 or Fritz-X guided bombs, are well known to many. But during the war, the US also developed different guided weapons. In the so-called SWOD program, several different guiding systems were tested, from the basic visual guidance, similarly to the German Henschel HS-293 type, to passive and eventually active radar guidance. The final variant, the ASM-N2, was a fully self-guided bomb featuring active radar guidance, and it could carry its explosive load to 15 to 20 miles range. During World War II, many countries developed manned torpedoes. Maybe the Italians were the most prominent users, and they developed several types, and these weapons proved to be effective. The Italian SLC was basically just a modified torpedo, with outside controls and a detachable warhead. It was first used in 1941 against British ships in Alexandria Harbor, and managed to sink 2 battleships. The Italians later developed a bigger purpose-built version, the SSB. The British and the Germans also developed their own types later. The British Chariot followed the Italian SLC design, while the Germans used more sophisticated types, with separate cockpits and carrying another detachable torpedo under the vehicle. The Panzerkampfwagen 5, or better known as Panther, is one of the best known German tanks of World War II. But not everyone knows that for a long time during its development it was planned to look completely different. Several competing designs were considered for this tank, and for a long time the Daimler proposal seemed to be the best, which was heavily influenced by the Soviet T-34. It featured sloped armor, a forward-mounted turret, a diesel engine, and rear-mounted transmission. But in the end, the events in the war forced the Commission to choose the proposal from MAN, as it was a more conventional design, using existing engine and drivetrain components and an existing turret, which was originally designed for a Tiger tank variant. Before and at the beginning of World War II, the French opted to build bigger and stronger tanks than other nations. The Char D2 and B1 models feature stronger armor than their German rivals. But the largest one, the Char 2C model, was actually the biggest operational tank ever built, even bigger than the late war German design, the Maus. It was a true land battleship, more than 4 meters tall, 3 meters wide, and about 10.3 meters long. It had a crew of 12, featured 2 engines, a 75mm gun, 4 machine guns, and its armor was around 45mm thick. Only 10 units were built, however, and they were more of a propaganda tool than actual effective weapons. The Dornier DO335 was an interesting late war design, using 2 engines, one in the nose and one in the tail, making this type the fastest propeller-driven fighter of World War II. What most people don't know is originally this plane was designed as a high-speed bomber, and it was only modified later as a multi-role fighter, and because of that, almost all variants of the type featured an internal bomb bay. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.